Jen, the meeting about to get underway, as Carol mentioned. We have the Bloomberg Next Africa newsletter, and we noted in that newsletter that the summit this year risks being a dud. What's going on? Why is that?
Yeah, Tim, I think it depends on who you're speaking to, really, right? Because throughout this whole G20 presidency that South Africa has had, there's been quite a bit of overshadowing, which has primarily come from the U.S. president and the delegation really adamantly and vehemently denying and disputing a lot of what they say is their misalignment on some of the priorities of the South African president. This year's theme for the G20 summit is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And much of what we've heard from the U.S. President Donald Trump is that the U.S. does not align with this proposed theme. And so the concern here really has been what, if at all, involvement the U.S. will have in this year's summit. For most of the past few months, we've understood that President Trump was not going to be in attendance. We thought potentially Vice President J.D. Vance would make an appearance. And then, of course, we know over the past few weeks, President Trump said no U.S. officials would be allowed to attend this summit because of some of the allegations that he has for what he believes are happening in South Africa. And so the concern here really is that a lot of this back and forth seemingly between two bilateral partners, South Africa and the United States, risks overshadowing any sort of progress that we get from this summit. I should just update, though, that, of course, we did get an 11th hour, seemingly an about face over the past few hours that seemed like potentially we would get a U.S. official on the ground. Caroline Leavitt from the White House said that wasn't, in fact, going to happen. But as you mentioned, of course, the U.S. is going to host the G20 in 2026. So many people are wondering what, if at any, declaration and consensus will we get over the next few days. It seems like potentially the leaders that are here, and we should mention there are quite a few who are still in attendance at the summit over the next few days, may be able to find alignment. Really what will be the big question, though, is whether or not the U.S. will continue to prioritize some of the recommendations that we see in the declaration if we do get that at the end of this weekend.
You know, Jen, as you pointed out, it's President Trump largely right in terms of criticism about South Africa and what he perceives as things happening there. Having said that, I'm looking at like our roundup and, our weekly look at the region. China continues to invest in, places across the continent. NVIDIA-backed cassava technologies, raising as much as $700 million to build and upgrade a network of data centers across Africa with AI chips. I mean, companies and other partners are there and continue to increase their presence. But this area. Talk to us about kind of what we need to know and who's there and what's going to go on at this summit.
Right. And Carol, I think that's an important point that you mentioned. Over the past few days, we had the B-20, which is, of course, the corporate sector convening before the public sector convenes. And what they were telling us across the past few days that we've been on the ground is that they are all in alignment on many of the recommendations that was put forward as South Africa was the first African country to host the G20. Many of the priorities being getting a hold on debt, of course, high debt for a number of global South and emerging market economies, and also trying to find ways in which the private sector can actually support development amongst emerging markets. And so the corporate environment and the corporate private sector seems to be in alignment. The question will really be, what will the public sector be able to agree upon? Some of the sticking points amongst a number of these leaders, based on Bloomberg reporting, is this element of climate finance and what that actually looks like and what sort of participation will we see from some of the other countries. But we have heard, India's Narendra Modi is on the ground here. Emmanuel Macron is also here. Germany and Brazil's leaders have voiced their own support for a number of the initiatives that President Ramaphosa has put forward. And so, it was very interesting to hear from the private sector, who says it doesn't really matter what comes out of the G20. They are, in fact, fact, in alignment, and they will help move forward some of these priorities. What, though, will the public sector be able to uptake and push forward will be the question. And the one thing I would add is that yesterday I was in the room with President Ramaphosa when he made the suggestion that potentially the U.S. was going to participate. And he said, throughout all this time, the U.S. has had a seat. They are always welcome to be a part of these negotiations. But the U.S. has vehemently threatened any sort of declaration at the end of this weekend summit. And so perhaps we don't see an official declaration. So maybe, in fact, the private sector is what drives these recommendations and this collective multilateralism, as it were, forward.